on the Harmony of the Gospels, part 25. Part 25. And we'll begin this one in Matthew 14. Matthew 14, beginning in verse 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus. What's a tetrarch? Tetrarch. A tetrarch is a ruler of a fourth part of a region. So Herod ruled a fourth part of a region. His region was between Galilee and Perea, east of Judea. Interesting thing. This was Herod Antipas too. Remember Herod Antipas?
No.
Nope. Herod Antipas is the Herod that Pilate sent Jesus to because he didn't want to deal with him. So he sent him to Herod Antipas. There was this fellow right here. Antipas was one of many sons, I think three or four sons, that Herod the Great had. Remember who Herod the Great was? Herod the Great? No. When Jesus was born?
I was just thinking that he was the one who had all the firstborn killed.
Yes, up to the age of 2. Yeah. Well, Herod Antipas was one of his sons.
Oh.
Yes. And Herod Antipas married a woman called Herodias. You know who she is? Remember her? No. She was a woman who was married to Herod's brother, Herod Philip. Does that make?
There's a lot of Herods.
There is a lot of Herods. Well, I guess they were called Herods because they're rulers of their own parts. That's a title like king, but not king. They weren't kings. They were rulers, but they weren't kings. The Herods. Well, Herod Philip had a wife named Herodias, but Herod Antipas wanted her for his own, and she did too, and he married her. Now, can you remember who was criticizing that relationship? John the Baptist, yes. Yes, John the Baptist called out Herod and Herodias for the wickedness that they were doing. And what wickedness were they doing? Herod Antipas married his brother Philip's wife. Doesn't sound right.
No.
No. But that's who these people are. Okay? And said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why these powerful deeds are at work in him." They're talking about Jesus, of course. Who is this person doing all these wonders? And the servants of Herod Antipas, who had John the Baptist killed, were telling Herod, "This is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead." Well, Herod wouldn't like that very much, now would he? I'm going to go from Matthew and Mark and Luke here, so I got to put my finger in all of this. So Mark 6, verse 14. Then King Herod heard of Jesus, because his name had become widely known, and he said, "John the Baptist has risen from the dead, and because of these miracles are being worked out by him." And Luke 9:7. Now Herod the Tetrarch heard of all the things that were being done by him, Jesus, of course, and he was perplexed, because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead. So some of the king's advisors, he'd like to be known as the king. He wasn't a king. Some of Herod's advisors and Herod himself started thinking that This must be John the Baptist raised from the dead. Right? You notice Mark called him King Herod. He wasn't really a king, but he liked to be called that. So, do you think Herod Antipas here was afraid? Probably. He just had John the Baptist killed earlier. And now there's this man doing these things. And he thinks John's back to haunt him. Or do worse. Mark 6, verse 15. Others said, "It is Elijah," and others said, "It is a prophet, or one like the prophets." But after hearing these reports, Herod said, "It is John, whom I beheaded. He has risen from the dead." He really believed that. That wasn't very soothing to Herod to imagine that. In Luke 9, verse 8, and by some that Elijah had appeared, and by others that one of the ancient prophets had arisen. And Herod said, "I beheaded John, but who is this about whom I hear such things?" And he desired to see him. Yes, he desired to see him, but not excitedly, I'm sure. Not excitedly at all. Back to Matthew 14, verse 3. For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip. This is the flashback. Okay? Now, John's already dead. Because John had said to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her as your wife." To have her as your wife. Luke 9. Oh, wait, no. All right. Mark 6. Not Luke 9, Mark 6. Verse 17. For Herod himself had sent and arrested John and had him bound in prison because of Herodias, the wife of Philip, his brother, whom he had married. For John had said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." How bad was that? What does Leviticus 18 say about that? John was calling him out on something. What was John's basis for doing that? Leviticus 18, verse 16. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. And chapter 20, verse 21. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Well, John had good reason for calling Herod out on this. Back to Mark 6, verse 19. Remember, this is a flashback. This is a flashback, a memory of what had happened. Verse 19, and Herodias held it against him and desired to kill him, but was not able, because Herod feared John, realizing that he was a righteous and holy man, and kept him safe. And after hearing him, he did many things, and he listened to him gladly. Well, not gladly. He listened to him because he fascinated him, but not gladly. And in Matthew 14, verse 5, and he desired to put him to death, but he feared the multitude because they held him to be a prophet. So Herodias hated John, and Herodias held it against him and desired to kill him, right? But was not able to. Herodias hated him because John called her out and Herod Antipas out on what they were doing, and she did not like that being thrown in her face. This was a Jewish custom and belief, after all, not theirs. In their minds, they were doing something that was just fine. And Herodias wanted him dead. But Herod protected him. because he feared the people. That was what Matthew had said. Herod protected him because he feared the people. But he also was fascinated and disturbed by what John was preaching. He also did desire, in part to have John put to death, but he was afraid to do that because of the people. And he was fascinated to hear what John was saying, and that was greater than his desire to kill him at that time. He didn't actually want to really do that, even though he would have been okay with it. Matthew 14, verse 6. And now when they were celebrating Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced before them. Her name was Salome. Remember that? The daughter of Herodias danced before them, and it pleased Herod. Therefore he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask, whatever she might desire. Mark 6, verse 21. But an opportune day came when Herod prepared a banquet on his birthday for his principal men and for the chief captains and for the important men of Galilee. And the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced, and it pleased Herod and those sitting with him at the banquet. And the king said to the young woman, "Ask me whatever you desire, and I will give it to you." Then he swore to her, "Whatever you ask of me, I will give to you, even up to half of my kingdom." Half of his kingdom. Would he really give up half of his kingdom to this woman just for dancing? Not really. It was a common gesture of generosity, but not to be taken literally. And where do we find that same offer of generosity in the Bible? Does anyone recall? The book of Esther? Remember Esther? Does anybody remember the context of Esther? The story of Esther? When was the last time anybody read Esther? Been a while. Well, let's go to Esther. Let's do some deviation into Esther for a little bit. I just want to read the context of that particular generosity first. Esther 5, verse 3. And the king said to her, "What do you desire, Queen Esther? And what is your wish? It shall be given to you, even the half of a kingdom, half of the kingdom." Verse 6, and the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, "What is your petition, that it shall be granted to you? And what is your request? It shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom." In chapter 7, verse 2, same thing. And the king said again to Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, "What is your petition, Queen Esther, that it may be granted to you? And what is your request? And it shall be performed, even to half of the kingdom." Does anybody know what her petition was? No. This is a good time to actually look at the book of Esther for a little bit. There's one other Bible study would we go into the book of Esther a little bit. Other than going into the book of Esther as a whole Bible study, which we might one day. But it's a good time to look into that. So let's look at Esther for a moment. I'm going to use the New Living Translation for that, just for easy reading. Okay. We'll go to Esther, the first chapter. This happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. This was a Persian king. Okay, and his name in Greek was Xerxes, or something like that. I can't pronounce these names. Anybody can pronounce these things, like, there we are. In Hebrew it was Ahasuerus, something like that. There you go, you can say it better than me. I don't know. Anyway, this was the present king of Persia. And his reign was from somewhere around 486 to 465 BC. Okay? And at that time he ruled this empire from the throne at the fortress of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign he gave a great banquet for all his princes and officials, invited all the military officers of Medina and Persia, as well as the noblemen and provincial officials. The celebration lasted 6 months. Can you imagine a banquet for 6 months? That's a long time. They did that commonly, these big banquets like that, just to show everybody this is how great we are, or how great I am anyway. A tremendous display of the opulent wealth and glory of his empire. When it was all over, the king gave a special banquet, another one, for all the palace servants and officials, from the greatest to the least. It lasted for 7 days and was held at Susa, in the courtyard of the palace garden. The courtyard was decorated with beautiful woven white and blue linen hangings fastened by purple ribbons. It was beautiful. Drinks were served in golden goblets, spared no expense. Down to verse 9. Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women of the palace at the same time. This was his queen at the time. On the 7th day of the feast, King Xerxes was half drunk with wine, and he told Mehuman and all these other people to bring Queen Vashti to him with a royal crown on her head. He wanted all the men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a beautiful woman. But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. Then he discussed with many of his officials and his advisors what he should do about Queen Vashti, because she made a personal affront to him. This huge celebration, and he's requesting his queen to come, and she's refusing him. Verse 16. Memucan answered the king and his princes, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every official and citizen throughout your empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. So what they prepared to do was to banish her, and that's what they did. So now, this king was without a queen. What were they going to do about that? Chapter 2. But after Xerxes' anger had cooled, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So his attendant suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint agents in each province to bring these beautiful young women into the royal harem at Susa. Haggai, the eunuch in charge, will see that they are all given beauty treatments. The king had a queen. Well, not anymore. The king had a queen, but he also had a harem. It was quite common for the Persian king to have many thousands of women in his harem. After that, the young woman who pleases you most will be made queen instead of Vashti. This advice was very appealing to the king, so he put the plan into effect. Now at the fortress of Susa, there was a certain Jew named Mordecai. Mordecai is an important figure here. Son of Jair. Well, he's not a really important figure in the Persian Empire, but he's an important figure in the story of Esther. He was from the tribe of Benjamin and was a descendant of Kish and Simei. His family had been exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, along with King Joachim of Judah and many others. Now this was after the Persian Empire had conquered Babylon, and Cyrus, I believe, Cyrus, the Persian king, allowed the Jews to return to their own land if they wanted to. But Mordecai decided that he would stay in this land. That's why he's still here at this time. Now this man had a beautiful and lovely young cousin who was named Esther. Her father and mother had died, and Mordecai had adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other young women, were brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Hagai's care. Hagai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids specifically chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background, for Mordecai had told her not to. Esther was a Jew too. Every day Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to ask about Esther and to find out what was happening to her. So every day Mordecai would be there in the king's gate, in the court where the women were, so he could stay in touch, know what was going on. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments. Can you imagine that? 12 months of beauty treatments. 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When the time came for her to go in to the king, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to enhance her beauty. And that evening she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to the second harem, where the king's wives lived. Now the difference between the first harem and the second harem, the first harem was 12 months of prepping before you could go in to see the king of Persia. She would spend one night with him, and then after that she'd be in the second harem, where she would stay, because now she can't be property of any other man. She's the king's property. And she would never go in to see the king again unless he specifically remembered her and asked for her. The second harem was where they went to just live their lives in loneliness, because they would never be able to marry anybody, and may or may not ever get to be with the king again, not that they would want to. Weird system they had there. To be a woman in the Persian army must have been not very good at all. Anyway, for Esther to stand out would have been very significant, because every day, every night, a different woman was brought to this king. Every night. And 12 months of prepping. So Esther would have had to have gone through 12 months of prepping. This king would have had to have gone through, I don't know how many women like that. So for Esther to stand out in his mind, it was something very significant, and it's important. Verse 15, when it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Hagai, the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and admired everyone who saw. Everyone who saw her admired her. So, the king picked Esther. Esther stood out with him. And that was important. So, Esther became queen. We'll go to chapter 3. Sometime later, King Xerxes, I'm saying that right, promoted this man Haman to be the prime minister in his kingdom, which is a most powerful official that only the king himself is more powerful than him. And there's speculation that Haman is actually a descendant of the Amalekites. And if you remember the Amalekites, they had a great struggle with the Jews back in Moses and Joshua's day. They were a great enemy of the Jewish race. Now Haman was a very powerful person in this kingdom. And all the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show him respect whenever he passed by. For so the king had commanded. But Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. You can see why, right? Mordecai is a Jew. And you don't bow down and worship. It's actually not just bow down and give respect, but bow down and worship. Not as a god, but the next closest thing. Now Mordecai, of course, as a Jew, would never do that. And especially this particular man, this Haman and his kinmen hated the Jews too. Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show respect, he was filled with rage. So he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Since he had learned that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire. Every last Jew, man, woman, and child in this entire empire. And Haman approached the king about this and said, "There is a certain race of people scattered through all the provinces of your empire, and their laws are different from those of any other nation, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it please the majesty, issue a decree, and they will be destroyed, and I will give 375 tons of silver to the government administrators so that they can put it into the royal treasury." So the fate of the Jews has been sealed here. Every one of them will be exterminated. And where do we go here? Let's get to where it's more important. Esther 4. When Mordecai learned what had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went into the city crying aloud with a bitter wail. He was repenting on this. He was wailing and calling on to God to help make this not so. And Queen Esther was made known about this too through Mordecai. They were all deeply distressed about this. So Esther, being a Jew, and she was also the queen, but the king didn't know that she was a Jew. Right? What was to be done about this? Oh, I had skipped past something earlier. Sorry, in my summary here. Earlier on, Mordecai was sitting in the gates, as we know. Where was that now? Verse. Okay, we'll have to go back and look for that on your own time. But when Mordecai was sitting in the gates, keeping up to speed with how Esther was doing, he overheard two guards plotting to kill the king. So he made the king know this, and the story was true, and the king had those two men killed and thanked Mordecai. It was in Mordecai's debt. Now, that's an important part of the story that I missed there. So the king owed Mordecai his life, and Esther was also his queen. So there's two strong connections, Jewish connections to the king. Okay, let's go to chapter 5. 3 days later, Esther put on royal robes and